Hi, so today we are going to learn about the League of Nations, which is also known as Chapter 2 in the IGCSE History syllabus. The overall League of Nations, this chapter, the idea or the question that is being asked is, was the League of Nations a failure or success? And spoiler alert, it's mostly a failure. Yeah, but we want to see why it was a failure, and we have to have like evidence to support our claim whether it's a success or a failure. So this is what each section of this chapter will do. We will look at different parts of the League of Nations, like its structure, and then we'll look at it in the 1920s and 30s to see how exactly it failed or was successful, because it's not a complete failure. There were successes, but overall it's considered a failure, especially since World War II happened. All right. So its origins, we heard about it in Wilson's 14 points, and these are the three statesmen which was mainly involved in the creation of the League. Jan Smuts from South Africa, Lloyd George, Britain, and Woodrow Wilson, USA. It was officially established January 1920. Now, the aims of the League of Nations, there are three main aims. So, preventing future war, administrating the post-war peace settlements, and also promoting international cooperation. Um, so, there's a lot of details over here, but I have to say that these slides are also meant for A levels. So I will point out what you need to know for IGCSE. So of course, you need to know the three main aims, but in terms of the details, these are the ones that you need to know. So how do they promote future war? By promoting disarmament, abolishing secret diplomacies or secret treaties, and to have all the member states agree that the League of Nations will be the middleman or arbitrate any disputes between countries, and also developing the notion of collective security. So for this one, like all four are pretty much important to remember. Administrating the post-war peace settlements by arranging plebiscites. So if you don't remember what plebiscites are, please refer to chapter 1. It's on page 8 of the red color textbook. Yeah, then you can see what a plebiscite is, and also by organizing mandates. So this mandate section is not needed for IGCSE, but I will just explain it. So there are colonies that belong to Germany, Turkey, Austria-Hungary, and all the defeated nations. So what happens to their colonies or territories are taken away because of the Treaty of Versailles. But what happens to these colonies? So they are divided into three classes, A, B, C, and depending on how much the Allies thought they were independent, Class A is like the most independent ones, B okay, and C like they need like total supervision. So they will be put into these three categories, and then different allied countries will take care of these countries. So that's what mandates are. They're like mandated or appointed to govern or take care of these countries, these colonies that used to belong to the defeated countries. So here, administering post-war peace settlements, I would just say by arranging plebiscites for IGCSE, that will be enough. And then, of course, the whole idea is to promote international cooperation. So how do they do that? By seeking to improve working conditions and wage levels throughout the world through an international labor organization, by repatriating prisoners of war and resettling refugees. So repatriating prisoners of war, because these are people that were captured during World War I, and they need to bring them back to the original country. Resettling refugees, yeah, like all the people who ran away from their homes because it was being invaded, they have to be resettled. They're known as refugees if they're running away from their home because of like invasion, war, yeah. Providing loans to new countries, encouraging the development of education, and promoting improvement in public health. So these are the different ways that the League of Nations promotes cooperation internationally. They are also known as the committees, which you will actually learn about it in a later part of the chapter. So yeah, just a recap, know the three main aims, and then this one you need to know all. This one just plebiscites. This one I would say remember two or three. I think that should suffice. So that's the aim of the League of Nations. Some of my students will say to promote world peace. I mean, I guess that's correct, to prevent future war, right? But we know that World War II happened, so we know that it failed in its aims. Uh, yeah. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is the structure and organization of the League of Nations, because there are things about its structure, the way that it was created, that really did contribute to its failure. So first, let's talk about how it was structured. There was the General Assembly over here, and then there's the Council. So this yellow thing is like um, the main hub, okay? The assembly is where every single country which is part of the League of Nations, they are part of the assembly. Whereas the council, there are four permanent members and one non-permanent member. And between the assembly and council, the council is more powerful lah. Yeah. So I like to say, think of it this way. In school, you have assembly, right, where all the different classes have to come together and assemble, right? So that is like the League of Nations assembly. All the countries involved assemble together. Now the council, sorry, in your school assembly, it's not students who have to be there, but also teachers. So the teachers, think of the teachers as the council, right? The teachers have more authority over the students, and yeah, have a lot more responsibility too. So yeah, think of it as like your school has an assembly, and then the teachers are on the stage, and these are like the council. So that's what I always say. The secretariat, so the secretary, the job is to like write reports, come up with budget, plan meetings. So the secretariat like serves the council. And then the Permanent Court of International Justice. This is like a court, right? And then we have the commissions and committees. Now, don't worry about all the lines and all that, because they're not super important. Um, but just remember these names. Yeah, they'll be important. That's the important part. Okay, so let's look in detail what is the role of each of these. The General Assembly, like I said, this is the one that all countries are part of. They only meet once a year. So they meet in Geneva. Now, think about this. There's many problems in the world, right, every day. And if you just meet once a year, do you really think that you can get anything done? So that's kind of one of the problems that they had. And then the next one is each member state could send up to 3 representatives to meetings of the assembly, and they're only allowed to cast one vote. So yeah, basically the General Assembly, their job is to decide on general policy in the League of Nations, and then deal with the admission of new members into the League, and also to handle the organization's finances. Now here's the kicker. Any decision taken by the General Assembly had to be unanimous. Now, what does it mean to be unanimous? Meaning that if there are 10 countries, all 10 countries must vote the same answer, yes or no, right? If even one votes the opposite, that is not unanimous and they cannot move on and the thing cannot be passed. So you already have two problems here. They only meet once a year, which is a problem in itself because so many things happen all the time. And if you really want to promote world peace, then I think you kind of need to be like on top of things. And then the second thing is that they had this unanimous vote thing, which has its uses, but in this case, it made things slow and inefficient rather than helpful. Okay, we will talk more about unanimous decisions later. Then we have the council. So this is the smaller body. I said that there are 4 permanent members and 1 non-permanent member. So these, the job is to settle political disputes between nations. So this one is more of like since they're more powerful, they handle more, I guess, important stuff compared to what the General Assembly does. And they meet a lot more frequently. So 4 ordinary sessions each year with extra meetings known as extraordinary sessions being called in times of emergency. So they have 4 meetings that they will have for sure. And then anytime there's like an emergency, then they will have an emergency meeting. And you can see that from 1920 to 1939, there were 107 emergency meetings. We will learn about the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the Italian invasion of Abyssinia, Corfu, Hitler, of course. So all these are probably the causes of this emergency meetings. Sorry, not emergency meetings, extra or extraordinary sessions, right? And then also just like the assembly, all decisions had to be unanimous. I guess in a way it's kind of better, easier, I guess, because there are only like 5 members. So the permanent members, you do need to know who they are. Britain, France, Japan, and Italy. So 4. And then, yeah, USA was supposed to be a permanent member, but it didn't join. So, and Germany at the beginning wasn't allowed to join, but then later on in 1926, they were allowed to join, and they actually became a permanent member of the council. That is actually really, really big for them, actually. Yeah, 1922, they increased the number of non-permanent members. Instead of 1, they have 2, and then 9 in 1926. So, yeah, this one. And then non-permanent members. So initially there were to be 4, but then later on they had 9, right? Elected every 3 years by the General Assembly. So you can actually add this to the job of the General Assembly to vote for non-permanent members. So the first non-permanent members were Belgium, Brazil, Greece, and Spain. So yeah, just some information for you. Yeah, so when you talk about General Assembly, talk about how many times they meet a year, about the unanimous decisions, and also, of course, what their job is. And don't forget this one too at the bottom. The council, the same thing, but you do have to know who are the permanent members and also know some of the non-permanent members. Yeah, so that's about it. Well, so just a recap on the problems with the structure over here, General Assembly, meeting once a year, and also decisions have to be unanimous. The council, I guess you can say that the weakness is that they also had to have unanimous decisions because having if you ever had to make a decision with a group of people, you know how difficult it is to get everyone to agree because everyone has like their own opinion on something. Like for example, if you ask people, what do you want to eat for lunch? And then some people will be like, oh, I feel like this today. And then I feel like eating Japanese today. Another one says, I feel like it's Italian pasta. You know, everyone has a different opinion. And then there's also like people who have food uh, allergies and stuff like that. You have to take into consideration. So it's not easy to make a so-called simple decision like lunch. What more a decision about something that will impact the world and a country, right? So yeah, have I'm not saying that unanimous decisions doesn't have its advantages, but uh, in this case, it was really a problem. Then we go to the secretariat. There's not much. You just know what they do. Preparing agenda. Agenda is kind of like what you want to do during a meeting. Publishing reports, dealing with routine but vital matters, based in Geneva, and then all this. So I would remember this one for sure. And then if you can remember his name, that would be good. Permanent Court of International Justice. This one, know where it is in The Hague in the Netherlands. And then what is the purpose to deal with disputes between states? States is another word that we use for countries. So countries are also known as states. Not like, you know, in Malaysia we have different states. I mean, that is one word way, but then when it refers to like the world, states are countries. And then so they have 15 judges of different nationalities. They served for 9 years, and then it ran from 1922 to 1946. So later on, we will learn more about like the International Court of Justice and what kind of disputes did they solve and not solve. Generally, just know where it is and also about this, how many judges there are and where what they do, which is deal with legal disputes between states. Because the thing is, like when it comes to individuals like us, if we have like a problem with somebody and we want to sue them or something, we can go to the Malaysian court, right? But when it comes to countries, like what court do they go to? Because they can't go to their own court or one of the country's court because it won't be fair. So that's why you need like an international court just for countries. And then lastly, we have commissions and committees. So the idea is that these are established to deal with very specific problems. For example, like the Health Commission, the Refugee Commission, the International Labour Organization. All this kind of tells you what they are set up for. There's also like I think the Lighten Commission later on in the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. So the Lighten Commission was set up specifically to find out whether the invasion of Manchuria was wrong or right. Okay, so that's what commissions and committees for. They are created for a very specific purpose. Um, yeah, usually committees are more long term because like you're not gonna solve uh refugee problem in one day or like a short period of time, right? It's gonna take a long time. I mean, it's still happening right now. But then commissions are more short term. So like the Japanese one, once you're done with your investigation, you're disbanded. So I think that's about how you can understand the differences between commission and committees. So for this part, just know that what you need to say that they're established for very specific problems and then give a few examples. Yeah. Okay. Now let's see how we had talked about how like part of the structure is we contributed to the failure or the weakness of the league already. So that's one. But let's also look at other parts of its organization. Like let's look at its members and how that made it a weaker organization. Then there's also the idea of collective security, unanimous decisions, which I've kind of been mentioning a lot, and also the lack of an army. So all these are all part of its organization because it's the way that it was set up, right? And the way it was set up has weaknesses that made it ultimately failed. All right, let's go into the first one. So for membership, um, here this is a very famous uh, cartoon, and it shows here this is the USA, Keystone USA. So if you didn't know, this guy is Uncle Sam, which is like he kind of represents America. So this is how he looks like. He usually has like a shoulder length hair and then like a very long beard, and he will usually wear a top hat with some stars on it. And you have also this bridge over here, which has Belgium, France, England, Italy. So this is a bridge, and this last piece of stone obviously fits over here. Now, the reason why it's called a keystone is because it's an important stone or important part of the bridge. Without this middle part, these two sides, there's not enough tension to keep it stable and also like in this shape. So without this stone, it will fall apart, basically, this bridge. And so that is kind of what the message of the cartoonist is, that the USA not joining the League of Nations was a really big loss to the League of Nations. This League of Nations bridge was designed by the president of the USA. So yeah, this is why we know that the bridge represents the League of Nations. A bridge is also a very good or appropriate symbol, because the League of Nations was supposed to act like a bridge between countries to promote peace, right? So from this sign itself, it tells us what this bridge represents, but it's also telling us the meaning of this cartoon, because we have him here with the keystone not doing anything. He's not putting it down. And so it is actually a criticism of the USA that they came up with the idea, but at the end of the day, they did not join. So this is made in 10 December 1919. Remember, League of Nations was founded January 1920. So that means by this time, the USA had already decided that they are not going to be part of the League of Nations. So it's definitely a criticism of the USA, and also kind of like a foreshadowing of how the League of Nations will, how effective they'll be in the future. Right. So that is let's look at the specific countries that you need to know, and I'll point out what you need to remember and not. Well, I guess what's very, very important. So in terms of membership, we of course we need to talk about the USA. Some countries were not members, and this had an impact on the success or failure of the league. So the USA, why didn't they join? Is because the majority of the American Senate throughout that thought that the league would drag their country into future wars and disputes. So this is why America didn't join USA didn't join the League of Nations. Now, what is the impact on the league? Okay, so before we talk about the impact, we need to know that at this time, the USA is a rising country, and also set to be like the world power is today. So this is when the USA really began to become more and more influential, because they were not really involved in World War One. They were like involved for a few months, and that was it. They lost very little, but they gained so much, because first, the European countries were weakened because of World War One. The second thing is, at the beginning of World War One, they were selling weapons to the Allies, and so they were making money. So everything about World War One really pushed USA to become the world power at this time and also today, right? So knowing that they are a very powerful country, this has a lot of influence, because powerful countries have a lot more say in things and have a lot more effect on other countries. It's kind of like the popular kid in school, the popular kid, they have some sort of like power over like opinion in the school, and that's why they're popular. Versus like some rando, who says, oh, this thing, the color yellow is really cool. Then everyone's like, okay, whatever. But then, like, if a popular person says the color yellow is really cool, then everyone's like, oh, I have to buy everything yellow. So that's kind of like the USA in this situation. And so now that we know that, let's look at the impact on the league because they're not there. So first is the league was deprived of the world's most powerful, influential, and wealthy country. So that was exactly what I was talking about. And also, because of this, the ability of the league to take action against aggressive countries would be much reduced. Why? Because the whole popularity thing. Um, imagine that the USA, I mean, yeah, the USA is a huge economic power at this time. If the USA decides that I don't want to trade with you because I'm part of the League of Nations and you are doing a bad thing, then a country will definitely think twice before doing that bad thing, right? But that's not the case because the USA is not in the League of Nations. So this is what it means by the action is much reduced. And also general prestige of the league will be significantly affected because, well, the most powerful country in the world is not part of your organization. So how legit are you? You know, that kind of thing. Then we have Germany. Okay, so for USA, basically you have to know why they couldn't join, and overall impact is that it's not as powerful as the league could have been. Yeah. Germany, on the other hand, was not allowed to join until it had demonstrated peaceful intentions. So what is the effect of this is that it looks like the league is only for those winners and good guys. You know, it's like a club for the victors. And if you're trying to promote world peace and cooperation, that like ostracizing or putting Germany and all the losing countries in a corner, not allowing them to join your club, doesn't sound very inclusive, right? So that's kind of the irony and the effect. But again, like I said, Germany did join later in 1926 and even became a permanent member of the council. But then when Hitler became chancellor, um, he took Germany out of the League of Nations. So yeah, Germany just know these things. Soviet Russia, another country that was not allowed in. Soviet Russia Soviet shows that it's communist. So the reason why it's not allowed to join the League of Nations because it's communist and wanted and committed to overthrow capitalism. So yeah, they're not allowed to join because of that. But on Soviet Russia side also, they're kind of not interested to join because Britain, France, Japan had actively assisted in the counter-revolution during the Russian Civil War. So before Russia became communist, it actually had a monarch, the Tsar, right? The Romanov dynasty. Romanov is like the family name. And they were overthrown by the communists, the Bolsheviks. So this Russian Civil War is like kind of like the people trying to bring the monarchy back, you know, put the king back in power. But of course, the communists don't want that. So Britain, France, and Japan had supported the other side, not the communist side, and they didn't like that. So both sides also have reasons for not joining, not wanting Russia in. But in 1934, they were more tolerant of each other, so they did allow Russia to join, and also Russia wanted to join. But unfortunately, they were expelled like 5 years later for invading Finland. So yeah, Russia, the main thing you have to remember is not allowed to join because of communism. And again, Russia is a huge country, so you're losing another country, a big country's influence. So that's the thing about Russia. Then we have the countries Japan and Italy, kind of the same idea here that they were the council members, but they had invaded a country and then so got kicked out. No, not really kicked out actually. They left. And also Japan and Italy plus Germany equals to the Axis during World War II. So yeah, it's kind of ironic that the council members, half of them started the next war, which is, yeah. And then, we're left with Britain and France, who out of the council, and then considering that the USA is not part of the League of Nations, they were the only major countries, right? They were the only like big, powerful countries. But unfortunately, they were weakened by World War One, and then they had to make it work because they were like the older siblings of the world, something like that. But they had their own concerns because Britain wanted to maintain its empire and France was worried about its security against Germany. So even though they are the biggest countries and they had to shoulder all the responsibility, they kind of put themselves first, and then the league second. So you'll see that in a lot of things that will happen later that we'll learn. I will use the word selfish. Yeah. So that is Britain and France. So all this have to do with the problems of the membership. You can see like each country that I mentioned contributed to the weakness in some way or another lah. But most importantly was the USA one. Yeah, and Britain and France. All right, so now let's go into collective security. So what is collective security? Collective security is a tool, right? Because we have the League of Nations, and the League of Nations, they want to promote peace, but how? Right? You want to promote peace by arbitrating between two countries. Okay, so what is going to make the country listen to you? So this is when collective security comes in, that you need this tool, right? Imagine like the problems of the world were a nail that you need to hammer into the wood. So the collective security would be that hammer that you use to hammer it down. Yeah, so it's a tool in which the league was to maintain its power. This collective security can be broken down into three stages: moral disapproval, economic sanctions, and military sanctions. And it goes from um, least serious to the most serious. Yeah, least serious action, most serious action that they can take against a country. Okay, so say we have a country and it wants to invade another country. So how will the league use collective security to deal with that aggressor country? First, they will have moral disapproval. So all the countries in the League of Nations will look at the country and be like, dude, no, it's not cool, right? So it's kind of like peer pressure, right? So then the aggressive country will be like, oh, the whole world is doesn't see me in a good light, and so that peer pressure is supposed to make me stop my actions. Okay, so that's moral disapproval. Now, if that doesn't work, then they will go to a more serious one, which is economic sanctions. So if the country does not care about the peer pressure, then they will have economic sanctions where all the countries will agree not to trade with this country as like a punishment. Okay, and this is actually very effective, especially for smaller countries, because they kind of depend on imports and exports for their GDP, their gross domestic product, basically the economy of the country lah. But then the thing is, what about bigger countries? You know, what about bigger countries that don't care about imports and exports? Right? So yeah, so this economic sanctions, basically there will be a boycott on that country. We're not going to trade with you. We're not going to buy or sell with you, and we don't want to give you credit, meaning that you buy and then pay us back later. No. If that doesn't work because like maybe the country is economically independent enough, then there'll be military sanctions where they would send an actual army to stop the aggressor. Now, so that is collective security. Now let's look at the problems. So for moral disapproval, the problem is that it's just peer pressure, and most countries they don't really care about it. You know, I want to do what I want to do. I don't care what the world, other people think about it. Now, economic sanctions, like I said, it will work on small countries, like yeah, small countries. meaning that their economy is not very influential in the world and they kind of depend on other countries. But for big countries like Japan, France, Britain, Italy, all these are big countries, right? And well, let's take Italy. Italy, well, they can always trade with someone else. And then here comes the problem of USA not being in. Now, if the USA were in, if this economic sanction would be very, very effective because USA is the wealthiest and most influential country. And if the USA decides they don't want to trade with you, you are in big trouble because that is a huge customer. That's why, like the invasion of Russia to Ukraine, a lot of U.S. companies pulled out. This is kind of like an economic sanction. Also, every time USA has a problem with China and China has a problem with USA, the Chinese will boycott US products, and the Chinese market is a huge market. And so, economic sanctions do happen in a way. In modern world. But the idea is that big countries losing a big customer is going to be really, really fatal for any country, big or small. But USA is not part of the League of Nations, so the League of Nations cannot tell the USA stop trading with this country. It can't. So that's why it was not very effective because countries are like, I can still trade with USA. It's okay. I'll be fine. And then finally, we have military sanctions, which sounds great, but problem is the League of Nations did not have a standing army. Standing army means an army ready to go whenever you need it. The problem is that the League of Nations needs to call its members countries who contribute soldiers, then only they can send them out. So slow, inefficient. And really, by the time they actually gathered an army, for example, like in Abyssinia, it's too late. Actually, no, they didn't even do that. No, I I can't really think of an example where they actually had military sanctions. So yeah, in theory, collective security looked like a promising way to preserve the peace of the world. This concept is really good, but they forgot two things. Mm, Who are their members or not members, which is the USA, and also human nature. Human nature, which is selfish. Yeah, because economic sanctions, it really depends on all countries working together to do it. If some of the countries decide, yeah, we're League of Nations, but we don't really want to do it, it's not going to work. And also military sanctions, if a country decides, I don't want to send my army, I can't need them, then it's not going to work. So there's a lot of things that about this collective security, which is a good idea, but in terms of like actual carrying it out, it's not really good. So that is generally what you need to know for IGCSE. There are extra notes here, which is actually the next slide, but you can click either way because yeah. So this extra notes. Let's talk about the second last thing, which is unanimous decisions. Okay, so I kind of mentioned it when we talked about Assembly and Council, how they need unanimous decisions. And yeah, it I know I made it sound like it's a terrible thing, but actually there was a purpose for it. So that's why it means by decision, the unanimous decision requirement was quite deliberately made actually. Why? Because they wanted to prevent the league from being dominated by the most important countries with major world influence. So what this means is like in a say the assembly and the council were talking about an issue, and then like certain countries like Britain and France, they're obviously more powerful, right? So like if they went for majority, then everyone would just like follow the leader kind of thing. And then what about these small countries who have like an opposing opinion? They will obviously be in the minority, and then their voice won't be heard. So by having unanimous decisions, everybody's vote has equal value. It doesn't matter you're a bigger country or a smaller country. So that was the purpose. But unfortunately, like I said, the situation that the league was in, that it was dealing with world problems that happened really fast, and you need to make fast decisions. This did not accommodate to that. And also, there's no USA lah, so um, well, uh, yeah, in general, the USA just helps makes things. Without the USA, it's just a lot more difficult. Um, yeah. So this meant that a country like Belgium had to be treated with the same respect as a country like France. So that's what I was saying lah. Small countries versus big countries. The USA thing. Now that I'm thinking about it, uh, well, actually, no, it doesn't really, USA doesn't really apply to this situation. So, like, just forget about that. Okay, so yeah, basically, the decisions had to be unanimous. And if there's this rando who says yes, then after that, while everyone says no, then they had to vote again until everyone was unanimous, right? A majority or even an overwhelming majority was not enough. So it became slow and inefficient to deal with aggression. And then now we're going to talk about the last thing that's the problem with structure, which is a lack of an army. Yeah, like I said, they don't have an army. They need their member countries to contribute. And yeah, this means that they're again not efficient, right? And also, there's no guarantee that you'll get enough people. So, what is the effect of not having an army? The uncertainty created by this serious oversight meant that military sanctions could never be contemplated seriously where a major country was threatening world peace. So what it means is that like when Italy was going to invade Abyssinia, it didn't really have to worry about whether the League of Nations will send an army because it's a no-brainer that it most likely not happen. So Italy can kind of like invade Abyssinia with the assurance that it'll be okay. Yeah, it'll be okay. So yeah, those are the problems that the League of Nations face. Then after that, go to the next video for this part. But that will be all. So I'll end the video here.